my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is sponsored by Expectful, the #1 guided meditation and sleep app for your fertility, pregnancy, and motherhood journey. Just like you probably take a prenatal vitamin for your body, Expectful's meditations are like a prenatal vitamin for your mind and can help you have a happier, healthier journey to parenthood. Whether you are trying to conceive, pregnant, or postpartum, everything in the Expectful app was made just for this special moment in your life and created based on interviews with hopeful, expecting, and new parents just like you. Ready to reduce stress, improve sleep, and connect with your little one? Go to expectful.com/birthhour or download Expectful in the App Store to get started with a free trial today. Expectful.com/birthhour will get you an extended free trial of 14 days rather than 7 days. At the end of this episode, I'll be talking with Anissa all about their birth prep library that comes with your Expectful trial and with your membership, as well as their hypnobirthing course, which I've heard so many great things about, and I'm so excited that they have this offer because I know people are always looking for an affordable way to learn hypnobirthing. So stay tuned to the end of this episode to hear that conversation. If you'd like to join our Know Your Options childbirth course, you can do that at thebirthhour.com/course, and you can use the coupon code 100 for $100 off your enrollment. This is our comprehensive online childbirth course that you get instant access to as well as lifetime access to. So no matter what stage you're in, we would love to have you over there. And if you head over to thebirthhour.com/course, you can see in detail everything that's covered there, and you can always reach out with any questions as well. If you'd like to become a listener supporter, you can do that at patreon.com/birthhour. You can do this for as little as $1 a month and gain access to all of our archived episodes. And then you can move up through the different tiers to gain other perks like membership in our private Facebook group, monthly Zoom calls and bonus content, and even a second podcast called The Partner Podcast, where my husband interviews partners all about their perspective on pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Get all of that information over at patreon.com/birthhour. Today's birth story guest is Jill. She's going to be sharing 3 birth stories with us. They're all pretty different, and one of the things that was really notable to me was how her birth impacted her recovery and postpartum experience all 3 times. She also talks about loss, both her own miscarriage and her sister's full-term stillbirth loss, so just be aware of that going into this episode. All right, let's hear Jill's stories. Hi, Jill. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. I am Jill Itogwe. I'm married to my husband, Oshimago. We have 3 beautiful little babies. My son, Oshalema, is 6. My daughter, Keogana, is 4. And our youngest, ZMA, is 9 months old, which that went fast. We live in Dallas, Texas.
All right. Well, I'm excited to hear all 3 of these stories today. So let's just jump right in and get started with finding out you were pregnant with your first and how your pregnancy went.
Okay, sure. I got married when I was 21. My husband is 9 years older than me, and I was in school. So we just kind of always said we wanted to wait a little bit just to live in the same state, experience life together. I was like, if it happens, it's fine, but I do not want to get pregnant in college. I don't see myself finishing. So we just said we wanted to wait 3 years. That was always our number. Once our 3-year anniversary was coming up, we planned to go to Europe. We were going to spend a month there. I planned this trip for a year. I had all these grand ideas, prepaid, all that stuff. And at the very start of the trip, I just started to not feel myself. And I was cramping a lot, and I was just thinking, okay, I'm supposed to be starting my cycle, so that's fine. But more things started to feel off, and I was like, oh my gosh, what if on this trip, our last hurrah before starting a family, I spend the entire thing pregnant? Like, that won't happen. And I get closer and closer to my cycle. I just woke up one day and I was like, I just know I'm pregnant. And we were supposed to be going from Venice to Verona. And I woke up before my husband and went these little teeny Italian streets trying to get there before he woke up to go find a store to buy a test. I finally found a little grocery store that was open. I took a test in the bathroom there, realized I didn't really know how to read the test. It was in Italian and I couldn't understand what it said, had to ask the person in front. And there was just the faintest line, but I was like, okay, this means I may be pregnant. That's what I literally said to myself. So I thought it was going to be this big, exciting moment. And it was a little bit of a dud because I didn't realize if there's a faint line, you're pregnant. Told my husband that we're maybe pregnant and waited 2 days, took about 4 different tests that all said incenta, and found out, okay, I am pregnant. And I spent that entire trip so sick. All of my prepaid things, all of our fun activities in Switzerland and Ireland, I was in bed with mini wheats and a bag. It was just,
No.
It was a trip to remember, mostly because I didn't do anything. But that was the start of it all. And the rest of the pregnancy was completely uneventful. It was sort of that kind of thing where you're like, oh, it's pregnant women who are just feeling like they're blissful and they're glowing. And I was relatively fit. I felt like I just had a basketball on me and everything was great. We knew before starting to think about actually starting a family ourselves, we knew that we wanted to go the natural route. We had watched The Business of Being Born, and it just really resonated with us. And this was kind of our plan. And so we found some Bradley Method classes. We took those. We both read Husband Coach Childbirth, did all of those things. And I think I felt really prepared because I checked those things off of the list and would come to find out that there's more to birth than reading a book and going to the class. Anyways, I didn't feel like we needed a doula. My husband went to school to deliver babies, ended up playing football, which is very different, but he is very medically present. He is so helpful. And so I just felt comfortable without a doula, but we still wanted someone just there with us. So we asked my sister to stay, and she came to live with us for her entire college break. She'd have to leave on January 15th. Which was when I'd be 38 weeks pregnant. And it felt like a stretch, but I was like, I know you're going to be here. I know you're going to be here for the birth. And as we inched closer, the amazing, blissful pregnancy it died. It changed. It shifted. At 36 weeks, I started to feel like I could not do this another second. I don't know why it was such a quick shift, but we were actually at a baby shower of one of my sister-in-law, and I had to pull my husband into the laundry room and just whisper, like, I cannot do this anymore. He's like, I don't know what to tell you. You are 36 weeks pregnant. Hang in there, I guess. And so when I was almost 38 weeks pregnant, I got checked. I was just saying the pressure is so intense. I feel like if I go to the bathroom, I'm going to have the baby. And they just kept assuring me, it's very rare that for your first pregnancy, you will go early, just kind of almost take it out of your mind. My midwives just kept saying that over and over, that usually you can expect to go 40 or 41. And I was like, I can't even let myself think of what that would feel like because I just feel like I'm in labor now. And so I got checked. I was pretty much 0% everything, no effacement, no dilation. So I was a little bit discouraged, but it was fine. The day I hit 38 weeks, my sister and I went for a walk, and I had been having Braxton Hicks, but I just had to stop on the sidewalk, and I was a little bit doubled over, and I was like, oh, that was different. That was a different kind of thing. And it happened again. And so we just were like, let's just head home, and I'm going to get in the bath. And you know how they always say, if you get in the bath and kind of put your feet up and things subside, then it's not labor. So I did that, took a relaxing bath. Everything kind of calmed down. I didn't have any more of those feelings. And I went and sat down on the couch, and my water broke. I was like, oh, okay, this is happening. And I knew later that sometimes getting checked can do that. I didn't know at the time. So I just was so excited because it was January 13th, which meant that my sister was there and she would still be there for a couple more days. And it just felt so perfect. And of course, I was just elated and in that huge endorphin rush phase. not in any pain at all. I'd had the bags packed for what felt like a month at that point. So we just kind of loaded up our snacks. We were going to a birth center that was attached to a hospital. That's what my midwife group did. And it had opened 2 weeks before. And so I just felt so lucky. It was all shiny and new. It looked like a luxury condo. There was a fireplace and the fire was on when we got there. And there was cookies and everything. And I was like, this is just magical. And how lucky are we? And we just kind of called everybody and started praying and just couldn't be more thrilled. We got there. My dilation was so disappointing that I was like, oh, it's okay. I'm sure things will speed along. And they just warned me, it could be a while. Clearly, you're still doing great. It seems like we've still got some time. So just come on and get settled. And I was just convinced that this was going to be the continuation of bliss. And actually, I lived 5 minutes away. So I asked my sister to head home and get our DVD player and grab Friends so we could watch Friends, because I'm like, I feel great. I just want to sit back and watch my favorite show. And we were laughing. And in that 5-minute drive of her going home, grabbing the DVDs, coming back, by the time she walked through the door, I was like, turn the lights off. Everyone stop talking. Something changed. Like, this is not fun. This is not funny. I don't want to watch anything. What is happening? And that's when kind of the hard work of labor kicked in. It ended up being a very difficult and a little bit traumatic of a labor, just because mentally I thought it was going to be so different. I'm not quite sure why that was, but I just set myself up to believe, I put in the work and I am really prepared and it's going to be really smooth. So I knew at the beginning that I wasn't going to be able to deliver in the water, just because the way that the hospital worked, they hadn't approved it yet. So you could labor as long as you needed in the water, but you couldn't deliver in the water. And when my contractions became so overwhelming very quickly there early on, I just needed to get in the tub immediately. The only thing that helped was the water. And I was able to spend a couple hours in there. And at some point, it just stopped progressing. I had a huge plateau. And for hours, I just could not progress. So they're like, you have to get out. You have to stand. You can go stand in the shower and sway, but you have to be kind of helping, let gravity help. I ended up getting a cervical lip. I was dehydrated. I have to get multiple rounds of fluid. And it was just very, very difficult. Challenging was the word of the day. And when I had gotten there, it was my favorite midwife. So I rotated through the entire time of my pregnancy, seeing 5 different midwives. And that's just because, you never know who's going to be on call. So you want to be familiar with everyone. I know you're not supposed to pick favorites, but I had just really bonded with one and I definitely had a favorite. And just seeing her open the door, it was, I should say my water broke at around 7 p.m. And when we got to the birth center, it was just really soon after that. And seeing her open the door, just smiling and beaming, I was like, here it is. Here's my girl. This is going to be great. And 12 hours later, it was her shift change. And my least favorite, I shouldn't say least favorite, the midwife that I had the least connection with came in and was she's very all business. She's not there to dry your tears or comfort you. She's there to safely deliver your baby. And I cried so hard because I needed that comfort and I needed the encouragement. But I'm so thankful for my second midwife who kind of took over, because she just looked me in the eye and was saying, you're not really progressing well. And if we don't make a change here soon, we're going to have to consider something different. And she ended up putting an essential oil blend on my belly. And at this point, I might have had a lavender oil somewhere in my house from the grocery store, but I had no experience with essential oils at all. I had no idea what she put on me, but it made all the difference in the world. So after 24 hours and the cervical lip and dealing with the plateau and the dehydration, I just needed to be in the sitting position. I went to the bathroom and just needed to sit there. And I was probably sitting there for 45 minutes, just plain sitting. And I felt the urge to push. And I told my husband, I'd been leaning over his shoulders. Praise the Lord for that, man. A long time of supporting my very heavy body. And he was like, okay, love, we got to move you. We got to go out there. And I was like, no, I need to be in this position. I can't move. It's just that feeling when you are in that comfort spot where things are moving and you just feel like I cannot change. So they said, you know what, why don't we get you on a birthing stool? And I felt like it would be immediate because it felt so urgent that I would just push the baby out of the toilet. But when I switched, things stalled a little bit. I ended up pushing for 2 hours. I had no idea how to push. My son punched his way out, like right at the 2 hour mark, his fist first, which definitely left a mark. And my placenta fell out on the floor with a huge thud right after him. I delivered him myself, which I was so woozy. I didn't remember. I thought my husband did it. I pulled him out of myself onto my chest. And that was that. And it just felt, it was pure elation that it was over. And I was so exhausted. It was 24 hours straight of just hard work. And it was so worth it. It was magnificent. The stitching, I don't know. I'm sure I've heard so many people, especially on your podcast, talk about how difficult the stitching process can be. And it just feels so violating for some reason that you finally finished and you are just trying to have this intimate moment and you are just laid on the table and spread open like a chicken and stitched up.
Yeah.
It was painful. And I definitely had some significant tearing, which I would come to deal with later. But in that moment, it was just pure bliss.
Amazing. I don't think I've heard of the placenta just like, I like you described it as popping out with a thud. I don't think I've heard that before. So that's a first.
I had never heard of it either. And I was getting my placenta encapsulated. So I was like, is this okay? It literally just fell on the floor. This is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So then anything else you want to share from recovery or postpartum with that one?
My first postpartum experience, I think I wasn't prepared because I didn't let myself prepare. I listened to only positive stories. I listened to only things that I felt would comfort me to prepare me for labor and birth, just because I didn't want to be scared. But the level of difficulty postpartum would be, and especially for me, someone who had such significant tearing, I couldn't really even hold him. I couldn't hold him to bounce him. Because I was group B strep positive, I had to get antibiotics every 4 hours for 24 hours. It was a lot of antibiotics, and I really think it affected his gut. And my son was very fussy, very uncomfortable, very gassy. He had neon green diapers with blood in them. I had to significantly change my diet to be able to breastfeed him and not make his gut hurt. So it was just a lot. And clearly he needed more bouncing than what I was prepared for, and I couldn't do it. So I would just be sitting there on the couch, my chest just so sore, scabs on scabs, and watching my husband try to comfort him because I couldn't hold him, and just preparing the amount of time it took to go to the bathroom and do the peri bottle and warm it up and do the sitz bath and all of that. It felt like by the time I went to the bathroom, it was time to feed him again. And the cycle was just so challenging. And I live far away from family. My mom was able to come for a few days, but I just could not be more thankful for my husband in that time. But those were just such dark, difficult days. I started to get really depressed and anxious by the time the sun would start setting. It was January. So January in Virginia, it was dark, it was cold. And when it started to get dark at night, I just panicked and would have anxiety attacks because I'm like, oh my gosh, the night is coming. I was ill-equipped to do this. And thankfully, we were able to see a lactation consultant, and I was able to change my diet and make significant adjustments. And finally, after many, many hard weeks, healed the tearing. And then it just became what everyone talks about, the wonderful, beautiful part of it. But it was really difficult at the beginning.
Thank you for sharing that. I know how hard that feeling is, where you just want to be doing all the things, but have to take care of yourself too.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and move on to your next story. What's the age gap between those two?
I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, my second, when my son was 11 months old. They're 20 months apart.
I can relate to that as well. So how was your pregnancy that time?
It was less the joyful, blissful, feel like I just have a basketball under my shirt pregnancy, and more like what is happening to me. And I'm sure most of it is because I was not getting the same amount of sleep. I very much had a baby on my hands. He wasn't sleeping through the night. He needed so much of me during the day. And so I was just exhausted. I would also later find out that I had Hashimoto's through her pregnancy, which is an autoimmune disease of the thyroid. And I didn't know it and wouldn't find out for another year. But that played a huge part into just the energy level that was completely unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And I also got really bad varicose veins. I know my mom has varicose veins. I'm one of 7 kids. She didn't get them till much later. My grandparents had varicose veins. I was 26. I had never seen someone my age with varicose veins, and especially the kind I had, which it looked like, like ground beef in your leg or something. It was just, I had never seen anything like it. I was very unprepared for it, and it kind of sidelined me a bit, just having to wear the compression stockings and definitely taking time every single day to put my feet up. I just wasn't really prepared for that. I'd never heard anybody talk about it. They eventually extended all the way up my leg and across my vagina, which was also something I'd literally never heard of. And it just created all sorts of interesting challenges that I felt like nobody understood. And it was just different. It was very different. I think the hardest pregnancy was that we moved from Virginia to Texas when I was 35 weeks pregnant. I was going from the same midwife group that delivered my son and all of my comfortable experiences to come travel here and essentially just start from scratch. And I had to find a new midwife team. And we actually decided that we wanted to use a doula this time around, just because I was really set on healing from what I felt like was a traumatic birth for me. And I felt like in order to do that, I just wanted to have as much sort of on my side as possible. I wanted to have all of the education, all of the help, and just be able to do nothing but focus on birth when it came time. So I wanted to find a doula and the perfect midwife. And thankfully, we did that really quickly. It was shockingly really easy to find the midwife that I still use to this day. And I'm so thankful for that. So once I found the doula, I told her, my goal is to not tear. I feel like if I have one goal, it's to not tear, of course, on top of having a healthy baby, because that really, really made things difficult for a long time after. I was still dealing with a poor stitching job and, difficulty with sex and so much trauma from just tearing that I was like, I don't know if I can handle that. It was not a lot of time to heal, obviously. So I just kind of gave her that as my one goal. And I wanted to make sure that my labor was faster if possible. And of course, I knew that she wasn't a wizard and whatever my body was going to do, it was going to do. But I just wanted to make sure I did everything in my power because I wasn't as prepared as I thought the first time around. So we still were planning on using the Bradley method and reread husband coach childbirth. But I was able to implement things like spinning babies movements and eating the 6 dates a day starting at 36 weeks and drinking the red raspberry leaf tea and using the evening primrose oil and just pretty much any kind of woo-woo crunchy thing that you could have recommended. I was first in line to do it because I was like, no, this is going to be faster and this is going to be better. I started to have prodromal labor at around 37 weeks. And in my mind, I thought, okay, last time I felt really great right up until the end. And then I went into labor at 38 weeks. So surely this baby is coming even earlier. I was just convinced. So every single day that passed after essentially 36 weeks, I was like, today's the day. Bags are packed. Snacks are ready to go. Got the pineapple juice in the fridge. We are set. Today's the day. And I kept having intense Braxton Hicks and a little bit of prodromal labor. And it just gets so exhausting. And my family lives in Texas. So I remember one day, I think I was 38 and a half weeks. They all went to my brother's football game. He was playing football at Baylor, and that's about 2 hours away. And I was starting to just feel like my Braxton Hicks were turning into real contractions. And so I called my mom and was like, hey, just letting you know, it's not urgent, but I'm pretty sure I'm in labor. So just putting that out there. And she's like, oh, okay, Jill, we're going to leave. We'll turn around. And they left the game, drove back here. And by the time they got home, I was just crying. I'm like, they're gone. My contractions are gone. This baby's never coming. And she, of course, having done it 7 times, it's like, okay, you are 38 and a half weeks pregnant. It's okay. You're okay. So just a few days later, we were in church on a Sunday morning and I was singing and standing and I just had to sit down and take a minute. And it wasn't necessarily that I felt like I was in labor. I was just exhausted and definitely felt a shift happening. I hadn't lost my mucus plug, but I didn't notice that. I never noticed my mucus plug with my first, so I didn't really think anything of that. I just kind of was going to keep it to myself because I didn't want to cry wolf. So we had gone home and we were watching football, and I was just kind of secretly timing contractions by myself and realized they were really following a pattern. I was like, okay, this is it. So my husband and I went and tried to get comfortable, and I was just getting in the zone. I remember being really nervous to tell my doula because she lived about 45 minutes away. And so I didn't want her to come and it not be real. And because the last time I went to labor, my water broke, I just didn't really know what to expect. So I just was waiting for my water to break for whatever reason. I just thought that's what labor means. Like, okay, when my water breaks, I'll know this is it. I can tell now after the fact that I was in labor, and I mean really in labor. And I told my husband to call the doula, and I put myself on the phone. I was like, okay, just so you know, I'm not positive if this is it. And he's like, this is it. I don't know what you're expecting to happen. This is it. You are having contractions. They're almost 5 minutes apart. This is it. And I remember she got here, and as she got here, my son woke up, and he was in the room across the hall and he was crying for mommy. And I was just having serious contractions. I knew I couldn't go in there. And it got me so out of the zone that my labor stalled. I didn't have a contraction for, I can't even remember how long. And I felt so bad. And my doula's like, this is okay. This happens. I'm going to go sleep on the couch. It was around 1 a.m, maybe 1 or 2 a.m. And so she's like, I'm just going to rest. And the second that you need me, you get me. And I was so discouraged and just tried to kind of get back in that zone. And I went to use the bathroom and realized on the way to the bathroom, which was a very short distance, I had 3 contractions. And I had to lean against the wall to get through them. And once I sat down to finally sit on the toilet, there was a huge gush of blood. And so my husband called my doula in the room, and her just hearing me, she's like, we need to leave right now, like this second. And he's like, oh, okay, let me go grab the ginger ale. And she stopped him and looked him in the eyes and was like, this very second. So we all just loaded up, got to the birth center, and I was group B strep positive with my first and my second. And I just asked this time to do 1 round of the medicine, of the antibiotics. So we did that. And after that, it was just smooth sailing. So from the second I got there to the second she was in my arms, it was 3 hours. It was blissful. We just worshiped, and it was everything that I dreamed of, everything that I prayed for. I was able to deliver her in the water, and it was just magical. And thankfully, I only had this teeny tiny tear. It was wonderful. I'm so thankful.
That's amazing. It sounds like you kind of manifested all those things that were important to you with this one.
And I'm so glad I did. I was like, it worked. It really worked.
Yeah. All right. So then do you want to go ahead and talk about your next pregnancy?
Sure. So I had mentioned before that after I had my daughter, I found out I had Hashimoto's. And leading up to that, I just really felt very off. I felt so exhausted. And every time I would try to talk to a doctor and say that, you know, I feel so tired, I can't get out of bed, or it's hard to keep my eyes open, they would say, multiple doctors would say, well, of course, you know, you're breastfeeding and you have a young toddler. Like, of course you're tired. And I was trying to say, like, I've had a newborn before, and I know what that exhaustion feels like. And this is just something completely different. And no one would really hear me. And finally, I found out I had an autoimmune disease. And I didn't know until that time that Hashimoto's sometimes has an effect on fertility. And it was actually a dentist who told me that. And I had to wait to kind of get permission to get pregnant with Hashimoto's. Just things had to kind of add up a little bit. So once we found out that I had an autoimmune disease, I was essentially told and given very poor advice by a doctor to just cut gluten most of the time and cut sugar most of the time, and I'd be good and I could get pregnant. I was like, perfect, I can do that. So this would be the third time that we had tried to get pregnant. And with the first two, we got pregnant on the first try, and I had nothing else to go off of. So I just assumed that would happen again. So I was very aware of how different that story is for many people. So I definitely wasn't thinking I was entitled to that. That had just been my experience. And so I was just kind of going in faith off of that. So I also am the type of person who, when I am a day pregnant, I just know I'm pregnant. It's an immediate switch for me. I think, I don't know why, but I'm very in tune with my body that way. And I just know when I'm pregnant. And so I think I would have been able to take a test within 9 days before my missed period that I had a dentist appointment, and we had tried. I felt like I was pregnant. Everything was great. And this dental assistant, for whatever reason, started telling me she had been battling infertility for 10 years, and she was very sad and sort of distraught. And I just, in that moment, I was like, I will not speak about the fact that I think I'm pregnant. I just wrote it off. I'm like, I will not say it. And I was just listening to her story. And at the very end, I was about to get up, and she's like, oh, looks like we need to update your x-rays. Is there any chance that you might be pregnant? And I was like, I'm so sorry. I actually do think I'm pregnant. And she just had like a shift in her face. And she was like, don't you have Hashimoto's? I thought it was impossible to get pregnant with the Hashimoto's. I mean, especially to stay pregnant. And that was the first I had heard of it. I was like, is it? I didn't know that. And it was the first time that doubt kind of creeped in my mind. I was like, I'm not sure. Maybe it is. I'm definitely not positive. And I just knew she was having a hard time. So I went home and started researching, and we were about to move. So I had been in a sea of boxes and was so stressed and suddenly just kind of afraid. I took a test and it was negative, but I was so early. So I just said, I'll wait a week and I'll take a test and I'll just try to keep my mind off of it. And a week later, I took a test. It was positive. I was so overjoyed and just excited to start this journey again. And we ended up making our move. And within the first week, we had our first ultrasound. And once we went to the ultrasound, we realized that they said that either the baby was measuring very small or there was no heartbeat. We ended up losing the baby, and that was just very devastating. So I realized I had to start working directly with a nutritionist and an endocrinologist to kind of keep an eye on my blood work levels and what would be safe for me to get pregnant. And when I had gotten pregnant, it had already felt a little bit later than when I'd have liked to have got pregnant. And the fact that we lost the baby and then we had to wait another almost 2 years until my body was at a place where it could safely sustain a pregnancy. So it really took a mental toll. And as my numbers were starting to look a lot better, and we knew that just somewhere on the horizon, we were going to be able to start trying, my younger sister had a full-term stillbirth, and it just really rocked my world. So that on top of the miscarriage really, it just took a toll. And I actually found out I was pregnant a week after the stillbirth. And being joyful about it was really hard, and not keeping it to myself and hiding it and all of that. It just felt really difficult. And on top of that, as someone who battles anxiety in a big way, it just was kind of the undertone of the pregnancy, unfortunately, was just anxiety. And I remember we took a trip to New York when I was 9 weeks pregnant, my husband and I, and we left the hotel room. We were going to get breakfast, and I had to stop, and I was doubled over almost on my knees in pain from what felt like a contraction. And it just terrified me. I went on to have sort of Braxton Hicks-like contractions for the rest of the day. I was told to just stay in bed and take baths and drink electrolytes, but I was just petrified and was like, this cannot be happening again. And I decided, instead of going to a different hospital in New York, once the contractions kind of stopped, that I would just wait until I got home and try to enjoy and be present. And when I got home, I was diagnosed with irritable uterus, which I thought was a joke. It sounds like a temperamental uterus, and it is, but I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah. Cranky.
And I was like, what are the chances? But that definitely had such a big role in my pregnancy because I just felt kind of sidelined. So where I'm normally very active and exercising a lot and trying to be on my feet a lot, and I have 2 young kids, it was sort of a rule that I just had to put my feet up a lot. That coupled with the varicose veins coming back in full effect, I sort of just felt like a meme of myself. It's like, okay, this is just what it's going to be, I guess. So I actually started having very strong Braxton Hicks at 22 weeks and had to go in multiple times just to make sure that everything was okay. And it wasn't uncommon that I would just kind of have to call the day off and get in the bathtub and drink some magnesium to settle things down. So I ended up just having to keep a very watchful eye on my own body and making sure I wasn't overdoing it. And that, coupled with battling the anxiety and really not letting that get out of hand, was sort of the undertone of the pregnancy. And then in March, we all know what happened. We entered into a pandemic. And as someone, like I said, who battles anxiety, this was a whole new level. And it just felt unbearable there at the beginning. It just felt like a joke. I cannot take this on too. And we were in 30A in Florida when the world kind of shut down, and we got home and realized that I had to be extremely careful, even more so than others, where some people would do social distancing get-togethers and be ordering in every night. I just felt far too scared to risk anything because I didn't want to end up having to go to the hospital. So if I had gotten the virus or anyone in my family, then I wouldn't be able to deliver at the birth center. And I knew what worked for me, and my safe place was going to be in that tub at the birth center. And that was just the prize. I had my eye on the prize. So we saw nobody. We did not have takeout a single night of the week. We ordered our groceries, we disinfected them. And this was in March, and I hit my 3rd trimester in March. So proceeded on to have all of my appointments by myself. And the only place I ever went the entire time was to see my midwives. And of course, that was so different than my other pregnancies. Half my appointments were through telehealth or FaceTime. And I just felt less prepared. I felt like my comforts were taken. I didn't end up getting to have a doula. So all of my comforts I feel like I'd put in place for my 2nd pregnancy and delivery that went so smoothly kind of were stripped away. And it just was a lot to take on. And so I did what I could. Of course, there was more things offered than ever online. So I was doing prenatal yoga and things like that through Zoom. But I just really heavily relied on things like prenatal massage and going to the chiropractor every week once I was in my 3rd trimester beforehand. And that just wasn't happening. There was no way. Things weren't open. So I was doing as much as I could to prepare my body by myself and felt like I was doing a very poor job. Once I hit 36 weeks, I couldn't stop seeing precipitous labor stories. I became a target. It would be a random story on the radio. I would hear someone casually say it on your podcast. I would read someone on the internet who never even talked about birth mention that they had a precipitous labor. And I just sort of took that as a little glimmer of hope. I was like, this is going to happen to me. I'm going to have a fast labor. I didn't know what that meant, but I just knew. I'm like, this is going to happen. And because I still was really battling anxiety over loss and just the pandemic and feeling so lonely, I felt like I needed to try hypnobirthing. I'd heard so many great things about it. Again, I did this very DIY. I just downloaded the CDs and I did read the book, but I mostly just downloaded the things to my phone and I started falling asleep listening to them. And it was so helpful. I did not do it to a T, but I definitely used them to get my head and my mind in a space that felt safe and that felt focused and not so erratic and panicked. But starting at 36 weeks, I began to have what felt like labor every single night. I sort of stopped sleeping, which is not great with Hashimoto's, but especially when you have children that are home all day, all the time, and you are the one coming up with activities and ideas and the chef and entertainer and all of those things. Sleep was definitely more important than ever. It just wasn't happening. And because I had been having contractions for so many months at this point, I again was positive that I was going to go so early. Everyone was kind of on guard. We hadn't even seen my parents. We would not step foot in their house. No one had stepped foot in our house either, which was kind of making me a little bit panicked about when it came time to deliver, because there was just no other option. That despite all of those rules, and my parents are in their 60s, it felt so scary and unsafe to suddenly be thrown into this position. But they were constantly on guard that it could be any day. And by the time I hit 37 and a half-ish weeks, I was having these prodromal labor contractions that sometimes lasted 5 minutes every night. And it was so draining. It was so exhausting, and it would just leave me in tears. And it would be 6 a.m. And I was like, I cannot do another day of this. I just cannot. And my midwives kind of assured me that because I wasn't able to do any of these alignment things that I was used to, like the chiropractor and massage, my body was just working really hard to get in the right position for baby, which I understood and I was very thankful for. But oh my gosh, 5-minute contractions are so brutal. And it was so long and consistent. And it ended up being when I was 38 weeks, I remember calling my mom and just sort of in shame being like, I'm not even excited to meet the baby. I can't even think of anything else except for how tired I am. And I felt so guilty and so bad. And she told me that she's like, Jill, I had this experience one time and I need you to know you will be excited to meet your baby. And it's gonna happen soon. Like, you're so close. And that next day I was doing my curb walking. I was enormous, wearing a striped onesie jumpsuit because it was the only thing that I felt like could drape over my body in the Texas heat, that pregnant. And I was eating watermelon by the slice and on the phone with my midwife because I had torn my abdomen. I don't know how, it's just the belly, tore my abdomen. And I was like, it has to be today. I just got that feeling. I'm like, this is so comically bad that it has to be the end. And that was my only comfort. And that night I got in bed and I was crying and I was just so exhausted, dreading the nighttime. And I remember walking upstairs I grabbed a blanket and walked upstairs to just go be by my husband. Cause I'm like, if I stay in bed, I will just cry and cry and cry. And I just need to go be by him. And I walked through the door and was like, what if I go into labor tonight? And as I said tonight, it was like a lightning bolt striking. My water broke and just like popped and water gushed down my legs. And I was like, whoa, that was a movie moment. That felt really cool. And I just felt such a relief. Like, what felt like the worst part, the prodromal labor, had been worse than labor, like worse than my past labors. And so I was like, we can finally get started with the actual end of this. So I called the midwives. I wasn't group B strep positive for the first time, which was very exciting. And so I didn't have to come in right away for any reason. And they were very kind to just give me options. And they were like, if you can rest, we know how tired you have been. If you can rest, then go ahead and stay home and rest as long as possible. And so I was going to do just that. And I called back about an hour later because I had kind of cracked a code where when I got up to walk to the bathroom or walk to get water, my contractions really, really picked up. And whereas if I was sitting on the birthing ball, leaning over the bed, there was nothing. And so I was like, I can either really speed this up, if I take a couple laps around the house, I could probably have this baby out, or I can just rest. So what would you prefer I do? And they're like, you know what? Just rest. Just sit down, rest. And they were so kind to not tell me that they were full. It's a 3-bedroom old Victorian house. That's our birthing center. Every room was full. And I am so thankful that it wasn't urgent, I should say, because there was literally no room to deliver at that point. But they didn't tell me that until the baby was out. So I was very thankful that they just kind of made it up to me. And so I did my best to rest. I had lost my mucus plug twice, which I didn't know was possible. But at this point, I'd already lost my mucus plug twice. So there wasn't a ton of fluid situation going on. I mostly just listened to my hypnobirthing tracks. I prayed a lot. I let my husband just sleep. And I remember at around 6 a.m., I just woke him up and I was like, I still feel great. This is still completely manageable. I don't even feel like these are real contractions. And so I think we should just leave before the kids wake up. I'd called my parents when my water broke. They were upstairs sleeping. So I was just like, I'd rather not kind of get out of this headspace. I was really in the zone. And the only reason we were going to go to the birth center was because I was like, I just kind of want to get there. And we loaded up the car. It was very casual. I said goodbye to my parents. It was all sweet and sing-songy. And I got in the car and we pulled out of the neighborhood. And I had the contraction to end all contractions. And I was like, oh, this is it. You need to stop. I'm not having this baby. And I'm not driving to the birth center. And that's the end. Like, we're done. And we were just in the middle of the road, leaving our neighborhood. And my husband was like, love, you have to have the baby. And that means we have to get there. So why don't you maybe try to get on all fours in the back seat? But we've got to do this. And that drive was the most brutal drive of my life. And I sat in the back on all fours and was just convinced. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the precipitous labor. I will have this baby in the car. I've listened to all those episodes of people having their baby in their back seat. Like, this is going to be my life. And thankfully it wasn't. We made it. And when we got there, she checked me and told me that I was out of 4. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I was so discouraged. And I was like, am I just this out of the game? Do I not remember what it really feels like? I felt like that was really intense, but I'm only out of 4. And I just bawled like a toddler. And I just held my head back and literally looked at this guy crying. And my husband's like, okay, let's go outside. Let's go. They have a great porch swing. And I sat down on the porch swing and I was like, I can't be out of 4. I know what I'm feeling. And I was like, I need an epidural. I need something. I cannot do what's happening here if I'm out of 4. And within the next 10 minutes, there was a huge, a drastic shift. And I just kind of not demanded, because I'm not a demanding person, but I strongly requested that I be checked again. And as we went up the stairs to kind of get settled in a room and go get checked, every single stair was stopping with contractions. And I looked at my midwife so desperately, and I just remember how desperate I felt. And I was like, do you think I'm going to go through transition soon? And she's like, oh, sweetie, I think you are going through transition. If I had to bet, this is it. And I made it to the bed, and sure enough, I was at a 9. And she's like, okay, let's get you straight in the water. And there are multiple different rooms and tubs. Like I said, there are 3 rooms, and the only one available was this teeny tiny tub. I am 6 feet tall. At the time of giving birth, I was 220 pounds. I am no small flower. And I just could not care less. It was like me giving birth in a puddle, but it was just the fact that there was water. I did not care. I was so happy to get in that tub. And I remember trying to get comfortable. Like I said, picture me trying to get comfortable, and it wasn't happening. And everything just felt so sharp. And I know that's because my water broke. Whereas last time when I was giving birth in the water with my second daughter, my water didn't break until I pushed for the first time. So it was just much more blissful, and there was so much more roomy in there. Whereas this time, it just felt like every single movement I was feeling so strongly, and the contractions were so intense, and I was leaning back on my elbows, and my husband had the handheld kind of tub thing spraying on my belly. And that was the only thing that felt good. And I could kind of tell I was getting to the point where I needed to push, but I just wanted to soak up the rest and kind of like gird up my strength. And when the time finally came, I got on all fours. And I think I'd said my husband went to school to deliver babies. I stole his thunder and in my zombie-like state delivered our first on accident. And the second one came out so fast that our midwife caught her. And my husband's been like, can I please catch the baby? And so he kind of got all set to deliver the baby and was positioned in a way that he could do so. And I'm so thankful. My midwives knew how important it was to me that I didn't have severe tearing if it were possible to prevent. And so I began pushing. And thankfully, I had done so much research, pushing and proper pushing techniques, and to more breathe the baby out instead of do the biggest push imaginable. And so I was doing that. But at some point, I don't know, sometimes it just happens where you're like, if I do the world's largest push, this will be over. And so I started to do that. And my midwife kind of stopped me and gently, my husband said she just guided the head out, like just that very moment of crowning, she put her hands in place to kind of guide the head out a little bit. So it was a little more gentle. And then he was able to deliver the baby. And we've never found out the gender of any of our kids, but we've always just had a hunch, and so much of a hunch that we only have that gender of a name, which is really risky. And I don't recommend it, but it's worked 3 times. And so we just knew it was a girl. We had this feeling. My husband's Nigerian, and in his culture, the name is a blessing from the grandparents. And we kind of decide on names together. And so we had this name. And she came out and he delivered her and said, "It's a boy." And I was like, what? We were just positive that it was a girl. And I looked down and I could tell that it was just a swollen girl situation. And the umbilical cord was kind of hanging between her legs and she was swollen. And he was just like, "Oh, it's a boy." And the nurses and midwife were like, "Try again." He's like, "Oh my gosh, it's a girl."
That's funny.
Which was so funny. And we just all busted up laughing. And it was a girl, our Zieme Azariah Atogwe. And I had 0 tearing. I felt incredible. I ended up, she latched right away. It was not painful for me. The painful latching doesn't happen until you are home alone for whatever reason. Like, they're fine in the birth center or the hospital. It's like when you're home in the middle of the night that they're like a snapping turtle. But she latched great. I delivered the placenta, no problem. I was bleeding a little bit more than usual, but I think that was due to my medication. So we ended up just having to stay for, I think, 4 hours, and we went home. And it was just the most magical ending to what was the hardest pregnancy I could have ever imagined. And I had such peace of mind and such relief. And we did end up going home to such a different postpartum experience than we were used to. My parents stayed for 2 days, but after that they had to head home, and it was just us and my husband, him caring for essentially just the 5 of us and cooking every meal and making sure I was getting rest and the kids were fed and everything. And his parents are in Canada, and they usually come for almost a month, and they weren't allowed to do that. And we were just alone. And that part of postpartum was so difficult, but in such a time of this pandemic where there was so much loss and just hard to be able to look around me every day and be like, this is it. Like, I'm only with these 5 people for what feels like a million days at this point, but this is it.
Yeah.
And we're okay. That was just the sweetest end to the hardest pregnancy.
All right. Well, I'm so glad we were able to fit in all of those stories. Do you want to go ahead and share some of your favorite resources here at the end? I know you mentioned a couple already.
I would love to. First of all, this podcast is so helpful. And for anyone who struggles with feeling low or scared or just any kind of anxious feelings about birth, at this point, I've listened to probably every episode, but during pregnancy, I only listened to positive birth stories to kind of just strengthen me and to fill my cup up with all these positive outcomes. And I recommend this podcast to everybody.
Oh, thank you.
Husband Coach Childbirth and the Bradley Method is a class, but all of those resources have been so helpful to us. Spinning Babies is also a resource that I recommend to everybody. I was a little bit intimidated. There's so much content on there that is so fantastic and helpful, but my doula kind of helped guide me through that. Even if you're not looking for things to help the baby get into a different position or flip a breech baby, there's so many moves and exercises you can do daily on there, and they just make it really easy. So that was really helpful for me too.
Great. And then where's the best place for people to connect with you?
I have a blog called Golden Graphite, and you can just essentially type anything in the search bar that you could ever want to know, and it's likely there. And then on Instagram, I'm at Jill Atogwe, just my name, and I'm there pretty much every day.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jill, for sharing today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now I'm going to talk to Anissa from Expectful all about their birth and hypnobirthing library within the Expectful app. Don't forget, you can go to expectful.com/birth hour to get an extended free trial. Hi, Anissa. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
All right, so we got to hear from you last month a little bit about how you discovered Expectful and a little bit of your story, but can you remind listeners who you are and what you do over at Expectful for anyone who's new to the podcast?
Absolutely. Again, so my name is Anissa Amat. I am the head of community at Expectful, which is a meditation and sleep app for fertility, pregnancy, and parenthood. It's so just the full circle, I guess you can call it. I discovered Expectful, in 2018 when I was pregnant with my now 19-month-old daughter, Nyla. And it was a couple of weeks after my 20-week scan when I discovered the app. My doctor had expressed concerns about my baby's weight, which led to weekly visits with a high-risk specialist. And, I was holding on to this idea that everything in my pregnancy, every step was supposed to be perfect. And while there wasn't anything that I was necessarily doing wrong, I still placed so much blame on myself when I was going through, they were telling me like my placenta wasn't delivering enough nutrients to my baby. And I believed that was my fault. Yeah. Right. So I was introduced to Expectful, and the very first meditation, I remember it like it was yesterday. The first meditation that I did was trusting your body. And I remember just meditating and like listening to the words and like sobbing. But I mean, the meditation, it supported me and it encouraged me and reminded me that my body knew what it was doing and to trust it. So now, a couple of years later, I have the opportunity to now write these meditations for women all over the world, and to, just try to give them what I received when I discovered Expectful.
I love that story. That just gives me goosebumps when I hear it. So neat. All right, so last time we chatted a little bit about just kind of an overview of everything you guys offer with Expectful, and today we're going to do a deeper dive into your a little bit newer birth prep library and very new hypnobirthing course. So this is a topic that comes up a lot when I'm talking to my listeners that are looking for different techniques or guides and methods on preparing for birth. So what are some of the benefits of a meditation practice when preparing for birth?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the greatest benefits that meditation provided me when I was in labor was deep breathing techniques. Mm-hmm. By gaining this skill, I was able to relax and focus my concentration on my breathing. And I mean, obviously, I was still in so much pain, but I was able to really direct my attention off of the pain and to my breathing. Meditation can also be helpful in reducing some of the fear of the unknown that we step into before and sometimes even during labor.
Yes, yes. I think that the unknown of labor is definitely the common theme in all the stories that I hear. And I think that any extra tools you can have in your toolbox to cope with labor are amazing. So it sounds like it really is possible to meditate during labor. So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So like I said, it's all in the deep breathing and guiding your awareness to your breath. It's all about acknowledging the pain and that it's there and that it's with you and occurring within you, but just kind of allowing it to just be, not giving it your attention or your focus. It can definitely be challenging to refocus your awareness to your breath while in labor, especially when those contractions are like really back to back. You know what I mean? But we also, some of our offerings include guided meditations that guide you in reclaiming your focus and that support you through your breathing. And we love hearing stories and getting pictures from our community of people using Expectful during their birth.
That's so cool. Okay, so just continuing this conversation around different techniques you can use during labor. I know that Expectful recently offers, or recently added a hypnobirthing course to the app that's just completely included with the app subscription, which is so amazing. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that course and why you've expanded beyond just meditation and more into an actual course format?
Absolutely, yeah. So we took a poll from all of our users and asked what they wanted to see in the app. Overwhelmingly, women wanted to know about hypnobirthing. And we're really excited that the course is available in-app at no extra cost. So if someone is interested in exploring it, they can start on a free trial and get access to the course and everything else available in the app. So the course is divided into a few main chapters and bite-sized lessons, so you can fit it easily into your schedule. We worked with a clinical hypnotherapist and hypnobirthing teacher to create it, and it covers why hypnobirthing matters and how it works. It provides skills necessary to use this technique. And most importantly, the course guides you on how to plan and manifest your own positive birth experience.
So cool. I love that this is in the app now because people are always asking me which hypnobirthing course to do in person versus online and all these things. And I personally have never done hypnobirthing, so I rely on other people's recommendations, but I've been able to check out y'all's course and it's really well done and it's so accessible being just included in the app. So I love that. So other than meditation, were there any other techniques or forms of support that you personally used during your birth that you think would be helpful to share?
So like I said, deep breathing was extremely helpful for me during my labor, which was a technique that I learned from meditating. And oh my gosh, I also had a doula, and she supported me throughout my pregnancy and during my labor and delivery. And God, doulas are truly unsung heroes. I mean, she was an herbalist. So throughout my pregnancy, she was giving me a different tea every trimester to support my body with whatever it was going through during that trimester. And she also helped me with my breathing during labor. We did some different exercises before I went into labor so that I was prepared. But during labor, she supported me in finding positions and techniques that alleviated any pain that I was experiencing. My husband, mom, and sisters were present, and she also showed them different ways to support me during labor. And my birth did result in a cesarean birth after 20 hours of labor and 4 hours of pushing. But still, I have no idea what I would have done without her.
Yeah, we're huge proponents of doulas around here as well. I love that you shared about, having done all this preparation and surrounded yourself with support. And then you did end up having a cesarean birth. And I know that, from so many of the stories that I've heard, it can be really hard to process an unplanned cesarean birth, and it can feel really defeating and confusing. And I think, I think it's getting better. There's not as much of a stigma around it as maybe there was even a few years ago. I think it's so much of that is just people sharing their stories online, which I love. And I also really love that Expectful has they've thought of everything. You guys have thought of everything. Specific resources for those of us who have had cesarean births. So could you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So we have a pack of meditations for cesarean birth and cesarean recovery. And these meditations are so special to me due to my experience with a cesarean birth. When I was writing them, I was thinking about my experience and what the support that I needed when I was going through the birth and the recovery. So with these meditations, the message that I'm hoping mamas gain is that a belly birth is birth, and to extend patience to yourself during your recovery period, and to honor the magic that is your body, this body that served as a home for your baby throughout your pregnancy. And something else that I really dealt with was that I had failed at something failed, or that, oh my God, my birth plan failed. Yeah. And just reminding mamas, like I said, to just extend grace to yourself. You know what I mean? When you're kind of going through that thinking.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think that a lot of the things out there to prepare for birth, just kind of, even though we know that 30% of births will be cesarean births, at least 30%, in some states more, and in some populations more, but so many of the things we see are exclusive of those experiences. So I love that you guys are addressing that, and we do the same with our childbirth course. We actually have specific affirmations for cesarean birth because so many of the affirmations are so specific to vaginal births, but you still are birthing your baby and you want to be in that right mindset for that, both during and after.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I feel like we could talk forever about this, but I want people to be able to know where they can just go ahead and get started and learn more about Expectful.
Yeah, so to try out the app, they can start a free trial at expectful.com or by simply downloading Expectful in the App Store.
All right, perfect. And we'll link to that from the show notes page and everything so people can find it easily. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much again to Jill for sharing her birth stories with us, and to Expectful for sponsoring this episode. Don't forget, you can go to expectful.com/birthhour to get that extended free trial for new members. I'll put that link on the show notes page, which you can find at thebirthhour.com by searching for Jill's name in the search bar.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.